Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 161 of Discourse and Magic with Gordon Precious. Now, if you don't know who Gordon is, let me tell you a little bit about him. A few years back, I got the opportunity to watch Gordon Precious perform on the Browsers Bash stage. That's the one-day Toronto Magic Convention. And he basically stood on that stage, he held a bird cage in his hand, and in an instant, it vanished completely. And I thought it was one of the coolest things I had seen that year. And over the next few years, I had been asking people, who is this Gordon Precious? And every story that came back about this guy was unbelievable. The things that he did, the places that he went, the stories that he had, who he's done magic for, how he's just everything. So I knew that I absolutely had to sit down with Gordon, and that's what this episode is. I sat down with Ben and with Gordon Precious. We went over to his house, we had some wine, we had some food, and we just talked stories. And Gordon is arguably the most interesting man on the planet. He went on a quest to find real magic and much, much more, and you're going to hear all about it right now. So here it is, episode 161 with the one and only Gordon Precious. Hello, friends, and welcome to Discourse and Magic. I am here with the one and only Gordon Precious. Gordon, how are you?
I am very, very well. Thank you for asking.
Today has been such a fun day. We've been welcomed into his home, and I say we, it's me and Ben. We came around, we drank some wine, we ate some delicious food. We got to watch an amazing video, which we'll talk about shortly, and take a look at some amazing things in your collection. And I figured, what a better way to just sit down. We're staring out into the beauty of Toronto, and let's talk magic. So let's start at the very beginning. So how did you get into magic? How did magic find you?
Well, it's easy for me to recall. At around the age of 7, I had an uncle who was a great humorist and comedian, and he lived in Toronto. I was born and raised in Hamilton, 40 miles away, and Uncle Harry, when he would come over, would stop in at the arcade magic shop just off of Yonge Street and buy jokes and tricks and gags and some dandy close-up pocket magic tricks, like the Buddha papers was great. And Uncle Harry also, I remember before dining, my mother was out in the kitchen preparing. The dining room table was all set, covered with a nice white tablecloth, and everyone else was in the living room, and he motioned for me to come out and help him. And what we did, we rigged a plate pop flapper. What it is a something that would cause my mother's dinner plate to bounce up and down. And it's a little rubber bladder, balloon, if you like, on the end of a long, thin rubber hose with a bulb at the other end. And he and I were sitting next to each other, and we would pass this bulb back and forth. And partway, just near the beginning of the meal, all of a sudden my mother has picked up her knife and fork and is ready to cut into something to eat. All of a sudden her plate starts to jump up and down, and she nearly has a fit, and then everybody else sees what's happening. And
so did you guys, you two did a lot of magic together? Like he taught you magic, or he just got you into it?
He wasn't a magician at all. He just was a prankster and loved to bring, and some of these were simply puzzles, nails bent, and you had to separate them and things like that. But every time he'd come, he'd always bring something new. And I remember one was a little pillbox, a round pillbox, which we used to have back in the 1920s. And he'd take the lid off, and there were about 7 little corks, tiny corks in this, and he'd put the lid on and shake it and blow on it, and then when he'd take the lid off, there were only 3 left. and the others had vanished. And then he'd put the lid back on, shake it again, blow on it, take the lid off, and then all 7 were,
they were
back there. Yeah, and
wow,
that sort of thing.
So let's continue on the journey. So you started with a little bit of magic in your life, and then how did magic have a role in your life? How did the next few years when you grew up, did you think about doing it professionally? What was that like for you?
Yes, I had decided early that I didn't want to be traveling city to city all my life to make my living. But I did it semi-professionally in Hamilton for the Lions Club and the Rotary and the Masonic lodges. And back in those days, I started off at $7.50 a show.
And how old were you during this time? Like when you say back in those days?
Yeah, I was about 13 by that time. Let's say I was born in 1924, so that would
born
be...
in 1934, okay.
Yeah, and so that would be about 1930, what did I say? 13, yeah, wow. So it would be 1937. And the first magic I ever purchased by email, or not by email, by mail, was I somehow saw an ad, I think it was in one of the science magazines at the back. There was an ad for the Abbott Magic Manufacturing Company in Colon, Michigan, and I sent away for a set of linking rings and a floating ball, the zombie, and some other things. And I must say, and a Lota vase.
Oh, wow.
And
you must have been thrilled when you got the zombie ball. 13-year-old, the floating ball of mystery.
I was terribly disappointed with everything.
Yes.
And I also purchased a vanishing bird cage at that time. And
that you were not disappointed by it.
Well, I was for many years, because it was very, very flimsy. The old one was held with red ribbon wrapped around the edges, and it was so hard to hold it in a cubicle fashion. And I had it for many years before I was willing to present it. And then
now that's one of the things you're most well known for.
Yes, it's sort of my my pièce de résistance, and I have performed it literally thousands of times all over the world. And one of the funniest times was years ago when I was in my early 20s. Another uncle from Toronto had come over to Hamilton with the family, and he took me into the living room and he says, "Gordon, would you show me that vanishing birdcage of yours? I'd love to see it again." And I said, sure, and I went into the room where I had my magic equipment and came out with a canary, a fake canary, swinging in the cage. And so I asked him to put his hands, one on top and one underneath, and I had hands on each side. And all of a sudden, it's the first and only time it ever happened, the clip that holds the invisible rope broke. And the cage went flying over my uncle's shoulder and over the Chesterfield and hit the curtains behind and dropped onto a rug on the floor, so it dropped silently.
Oh, out of sight.
And it was just like Slidini's balls over the head.
See?
He didn't see it. No.
So it just launched behind him, and
That's
he didn't
right.
see the bird cage.
And I was so embarrassed until I saw his expression that he had no idea.
Totally clean.
Yeah, that's
No
right.
bird cages on you. Oh,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
And the only other time it ever failed was years later. I was performing in what was then Indochina, now Vietnam, in Saigon, in a nightclub. and it was so humid there. And I had a white jacket, sort of a sharkskin, I think they called it, and my shirt and my jacket were just clinging to my chest and my arms because of the extreme humidity and heat. And there was no air conditioning in this particular nightclub. And by the way, the owner of the nightclub asked me how much I would charge. I was going to be there for about a week. And I thought, well, I want to be sure that he engages me, and I wanted him to put us up for, give us accommodation and food. And I said, well, $40 a night. And at that time, I was making $7.50 to $10 in Hamilton, so that sounded pretty good to me. He said, oh, we pay way more than that. He paid me $75 a night. And, but there, again, trouble with the birdcage. The only time in public that it ever failed me, it was because my jacket and my
stuck.
Everything was just soaking and clinging to my arm, and it didn't disappear. But immediately I swung my hands behind my back and bowed and walked off the stage for a moment.
Well, maybe people didn't notice. So who
That's
knows?
right.
Who knows? So before we pressed record, we were talking a little bit about magic, and we were talking about your travels around the world, and a lot of what you said is it was searching for real magic and looking to find magic. And it's not often that we hear it, but every now and again somebody gets into magic, or I'm referring to like conversation of the podcast. We find out somebody got into magic because they saw something and then they looked into magic, and now they're all disappointed to find out that it's not real and that they have to do it, and that they wanted to do real magic. And you were talking about traveling around the world searching for real magic. So talk a little bit about that. Why, like, what did you feel about magic that you wanted to find something real and that you were willing to go around the world to find it?
Well, of course, I knew that the magic we see among magicians is there's a trick to it all. And so I knew that I wasn't going to find real magic among the regular magicians of the West, but I had rather hoped that maybe in mystic India or in Africa that I would see something that was truly magic, and maybe the Buddhists had something, or the Hindus, and I looked diligently, and it was a case of, as I traveled, the villagers, when I would do some magic for them, and they'd say, oh, you should have been here last week. I mean, I never did get to see these real miracle workers, but it was a case that they'd tell me that this man could, a mystic could pick up a chunk of dirt from the road and hold it in the palm of his hand and cover it with his other hand and concentrate, open up his hands, and a live bird would fly out. The mud had changed truly into something live. But I never did get to see any of these miracles. I saw...
But you did see a lot of magic.
I did see a lot of magicians, and I also performed in two of the top hotels in Delhi and New Delhi, India, for almost 2 months every night. And
how did you get that opportunity? It sort of derailed the conversation. How did you were in Delhi and you walked in and you said, I want to perform at your hotel, and they said, okay?
Well, a good question. When I left Canada, I brought a suitcase full of my act, my apparatus with me, and I was able to get an agent who had me performing in England. But I saw that I had hoped to work my way around the world doing magic, but I saw that it was interfering with my real reason for traveling, which was to to see the world and the people and the museums and so on. So I left my bag of tricks with a friend in London, and started off actually with a small motorcycle, and I wanted to ride it right around the world. And it all stemmed, I am sure, from a fantastic geography teacher I had in public school who made Africa and India and everywhere look so intriguing.
Yeah.
And then there were two brothers, the Toll brothers from Toronto, who hitchhiked around the world in 1936 or 37 for $75 each. They took 9 months to go around the world, and they worked on a cattle boat and worked their way here and there. But they had wonderful pictures of the pyramids of Giza and staying.
Were they famous for doing this, or are these people you knew?
They were famous. They paid their way through university by doing. In the summer, they'd go along the north coast of Africa and film it, and they would go down to Mexico and Central America, and take wonderful color pictures, and then give travelogues to clubs.
Whoa.
Like
they were the first travel bloggers.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
Travel.
Yeah,
I see. Yeah.
Wow.
And one of them became the professional photographer for graduates of University of Toronto. He had his office right on Avenue Road and near St. Clair. So I wanted mainly to go around the world and to pay for it as much as possible doing magic. And I told my parents I'd be away for at least 6 months and maybe as long as 2 years, but I'm rather slow at everything I do, and it took me 3.5 years to go around the world. And I did pay my way, principally doing magic, although I taught English for a year in Beirut, Lebanon, at a preparatory school for the University of the American University of Beirut, and then I, going through Africa from Cairo to Cape Town on a motorcycle, which was a 5-month trip and 11,000 miles. I would do magic for people that I met, district commissioners, and they would all have a family and domestic help, and at night I'd perform some close-up magic for them and try to reimburse for the kindness that they gave us, my wife and I. And so we made that trip and then went to India, but I finally ran out of money, and I had some at home, enough to pay my way back, but I still hadn't seen the Far East, such as China and Japan. Yeah. So in Delhi, and I had seen this fantastic magician at the Taj Mahal, a street magician. He was so good. And he came to our hotel room the evening that I met him, and I gave him a set of chameleon knives, color-changing knives, which he really appreciated, and everything he did beautifully. And then I said that I was hoping to be engaged in a nightclub in Delhi, but I didn't have any equipment, but I was going to try and make it myself from books I read early in my career in magic. And he said, well, I've got a vanishing bird cage, and that I never learned to use. And so he gave me that.
That's amazing.
And in exchange, did I mention, I gave him some chameleon knives. So when I got to Delhi, I went to see the manager of the, I'll think of it in a minute, the principal hotel in Delhi, and he said, yes, he'd be interested in a 10-minute act in his nightclub show, and he said, but I'd have to see an audition, and I didn't have anything with me, but I had 3 days to prepare, and I went to the marketplace and got a rabbit. The first one that was presented to me had its ears cropped, which of course didn't look like a rabbit to me, and but I found a nice white rabbit, and which I started my act by coming out, opening up a newspaper, and then crumpling it into a ball, and out came this rabbit when I tore into the newspaper. And I did the mutilated parasol. I bought a parasol, umbrella in the marketplace, and silk handkerchiefs of different colors. And I did what we had always learned as the Chinese rice bowls, and I changed the name to the Hindu rice bowls or Indian rice bowls. And I made all these things up in 2 days, and was able to do
And you were there for how long doing shows?
7 weeks altogether. And he engaged me for a month, and then he extended it for the better part of another month. And at that time, I did as previous magicians from the West did. I put a sizable advertisement in the newspaper offering 10,000 rupees for anyone who could take me to see the famous Hindu rope mystery, and but nobody ever took me up on that.
That's awesome. So let's talk about that quest to find real magic. What was the reason for it? And you know, one of the things that you said earlier, I think before we pressed record, was, you know, you spent all 94 years looking for real magic. You just recently stopped looking. So let's talk about that, because a lot of the conversations that come up on this podcast have to do with, you know, other people believing in, like, is it right for me to convince you that magic is real, you know, or is there real magic, or is it right to make my volunteers think that there's real magic? And we have a lot of these conversations. So to find out that somebody spent a better part of their life looking into that and really searching for the real magic is interesting to me. So talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I suppose I know it began at the Hamilton Public Library, where there was a book, books of how to perform magic. And first I went through the juvenile section and read all of those books, and then they allowed me to go to the seniors. And by the way, they were, interestingly, the magic books were kept in a locked area.
Really?
Yes, so that
That's interesting.
Public couldn't just walk in and see them. And
that is cool.
Yeah, and they had great books like Hugard's Greater Magic and several other wonderful old books. And alongside those books were books on supposedly real magic, and one by Fraser. Maybe you've heard of him. He wrote and, you know, suggested that that there was such a thing as real magic, and but I was never convinced from what I read on the subject. And amusingly, in this locked area, there were the books on conjuring and magic, and books on sex. And so it was hard.
Who was in charge of that library? That's what I wanted to know.
Well, they didn't want just anybody walking in and learning the truth about sex. And so, I mean, especially juveniles, they thought they might be reading things that were beyond them, so they had it in the locked section. But I had access to all of those. And didn't seem to do me any harm. And so as I say, not knowing any better, and I was religious at the time. I was brought up in a very devout Protestant Christian family that were regular churchgoers, and my mother was a wonderful person with a great attitude, and love taught me to love my fellow man, and we're all equal, except maybe in her view, some people were a little more equal than others. Like the English were, because she was of English extraction, they were just a little braver and a little cleaner and a little more honest than other people.
Often the way it goes.
Yeah.
What a coincidence.
Yeah. Yes. And so when I started out, as I say, being a believer in religion, I was interested and intrigued by Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism and on and on. And but as I traveled and looked for real magic, such as the Indian rope trick and being able to change a piece of dirt into a flying bird, I always got there too late, and that was the story of my life. And gradually, and I saw so many different religions in Japan, in Indochina, in Sri Lanka, or then Ceylon, and going through Africa, the way the people were tattooed with religious intonations, and I just never found the
real magic that you were looking for.
That's right. But I did find lots of other magic among conjurers, among magicians, and as the most incredible I ever saw was Gali Gali from Egypt. I was working on a ship to Australia, and we had to go through the Suez Canal, and at the approach of the Suez, the ship stopped and a rowboat came out, and he was hoisted onto the deck, and in Egyptian garb, and performed incredible magic. Like he borrowed a wedding band, a gold wedding band from a young Dutchman, and had him take it off, and Gali Gali held it at his fingertips and examined it, and then casually threw it over his shoulder into the canal. And everybody saw it go right over the railing and into the canal. And then he took one of his magic wands and had the same young fellow hold the magic wand at each end, and then he borrowed a handkerchief and covered the wand, the middle of the wand, with the handkerchief, took one end and pulled on it, and there, spinning on the wand, was
that
this
sounds
young
like a
man's,
miracle.
Yeah, it was great.
That's an absolute miracle.
But that was not the height of his act. The absolute height of it was doing the ancient, thousands of year old cups and balls effect, where you have three metal cups, and they were spun copper in his case, and knitted ball started with one, ended up with three balls, and they would jump magically from the cup on the left side over to the cup on the right side, and then he'd show that there was nothing under the cup in the middle, but when he'd put it down and pass his hand over it, all the balls would be in the middle cup. And then the next thing you know, he's lifting, and you expect to see one of these balls, cloth balls under a cup. Instead of that was a live chick. And then he picks up the next cup and a live chick under it. And then he sets it down, the first two cups, and he picks up the third one and a live chick. And they start to scoot along on the deck. And then he lifts up the first cup again, and there's another chick under it. And then he lifts up the middle cup, and there's another. and another, and he must have had at least a dozen live chicks running all over the deck, and it just, the
Unbelievable.
The crowd were just in amazement, as was I. It was one of the best presentations of so-called magic that I ever saw.
Wow.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
You joked with us that you spent 90 years, looking for real magic, and you didn't find the real magic. And I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but do you feel that you wasted?
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask.
Oh no!
I was going to ask, are you disappointed with what you found?
No.
Or?
By the way, it took me to now. I've been to 100 countries, and I just love seeing the cultures and the ways of people. And it was certainly enriching, and I would do it again. And the travel agency, the oldest one in Hamilton, had a tremendous motto over their door and on their stationery, and it was, "See this world before the next," which I think is great, although I have my doubts about the next, but it's not worrying me, as you can see.
At the end of that, did you feel like that you didn't find an answer, or you found the answer, and that is that it does not exist?
I found the answer.
You found
as far
the
as I
answer.
am concerned. I am a strident naturist, and I believe that nature is the foundation of all things, and is incredibly wonderful and incredibly horrible sometimes when you have terrible typhoons and earthquakes and so on. But all these are part of nature. And
we were talking earlier about seeing magic around the world, and you also said that you saw a lot of bad magic, or a lot of people that were maybe not, they didn't even care about things like angles or things like that. Talk a little bit about that.
Nothing is more pitiful than
bad,
than poorly practiced or poorly presented magic. And I must say that the majority, I made a point, of course, of seeing as many magicians as possible in every country I went to, and I was terribly disappointed in many of the Jadawallas in India.
And Jadawala is
being a term for a street magician, and but this one who made up for all the ones that were not so good, he was miraculous, performing right at the outside of the entrance to the Taj Mahal. And for instance, he took a tin can, a large empty tomato can of tomatoes, and in it he poured some water, and then he had 3 handkerchiefs on the ground that were tied up in little bundles, and he opened them up, and he took some black, or first I guess white sand out of the one, and poured it into this can, and then a handful of black sand, and then a handful of red sand, and then he mixed it all around with his hand, and then showed you his hands wet but clearly empty, and reached into the can and stirred around and asked me what color I would like, and I said, well, the red. And so then out came his hand and squeezed it, and then poured dry red sand, only red.
Wow.
And then again showed his hand absolutely empty, and then went in, asked me for another color, and I said black, and out came black sand and then white sand. It was just marvelous.
Wow. Well, it's great that there was amazing magic, that there was memorable magic that you got to see on the journey. And it's also interesting that there was bad magic, all across the world. And it doesn't, no matter where you are, there's the good and there's the bad as well. Yeah. We were talking about some of the best magic that you've ever seen, and you mentioned one specific story. Do you want to tell that story?
Well, my very favorite magical effect that I've ever seen was Harry Blackstone Sr. back in this would be about 1940, 41. And he came to a theater in Hamilton and did one of his effects that blew me away was the dancing handkerchief. And he borrowed a handkerchief from a gentleman in the crowd. And in those days, everybody carried a handkerchief and tied a knot in the end of the handkerchief and held it in his hand. And all of a sudden, the handkerchief stood up on his hand and started to dance to background music. And then it jumped out of his hand onto the floor, and he reached down to pick it up, and it leapt just before he grabbed it. It took a jump of about a meter ahead, and he again tried to get it, and again it jumped, and then finally he managed to stamp his toe on the one end of the handkerchief, and you almost felt sorry for the poor thing. And he picked it up, and it wriggled in his hands. It was just amazing, and then gave it back to the man he borrowed it from.
You strike me as somebody who has used magic in many ways in your life that, I mean, you've performed obviously, but not as a full-time performer, it's something that has opened doors, it's built relationships, and it's been a tool. And that's one of the things that hopefully I'm encouraging people that are listening to this that don't want to take on magic as a full-time profession, but maybe as a part-time profession, but also to find other places that it's valuable or useful in their life and in their journey and things like that. Do you have any advice for somebody who, wants to help find magic's place in their life, and maybe a story or something when it was particularly valuable or useful for you?
Well, I would certainly recommend magic as a wonderful hobby for anyone who is interested in magic, and it's intriguing to see wonderful presentations, and it's intriguing to learn how to do them, and quite mind-blowing sometimes. And one of my favorite effects is in a small group at a party or whatnot, is to mention that I've always loved traveling, and of course you have to have money with you, and so before I go to another country, I make newspaper clippings out of a travel magazine, the same size as the currency of the country I'm going to, and then that's all I carry. And when I get there, I show people around me that I'm show both sides of the bills very carefully, put them together, pass my hand over making a magical gesture, and sometimes add a little bit of invisible woofle dust, and suddenly, before their eyes, the clippings change to the currency of whatever country it is. And that has been one of my favorite standbys for most of my life. And I learned it from a Brazilian magician who came to Hamilton years ago and stayed at my home for a few days, and it was his favorite effect, and he insisted on showing me every detail of it.
What a great effect to do, like when you're traveling or in someone's home or arriving somewhere, for the first time, or what a great trait. That feels like real magic.
And then I mentioned that that way I'm not afraid of somebody picking my pocket or holding me up, because all he would get is newspaper clipping. So after I've changed it into the currency, I then change it back again to the clippings. And so in so doing, making the change back, I make a terrible error, and instead of that, the bills multiply in value, and so I end up with hundreds of dollars.
Oh, that's awesome.
And yes, that is one of my favorite. And the bird cage has certainly been another one that canary and cage vanishing instantaneously.
I know you have a big magic collection. We were talking about so many of the things that are in lockers that aren't even here. Can you tell me a little bit about some of it and some of the things in your collection that you hold close to your heart, and why?
Yes, I had used to live in a house with a huge finished dry basement, and I had gathered over 40 or 50 years what became one of the biggest collections of magical apparatus. I used to like it just for the beauty of it and the ingenuity of the tricks. And one of my favorites was what Robert Houdin, one of the masters of modern magic, had what was called the light and heavy chest, and I had a replica of that where I'd have my friends pick it up and place it back down on the floor. It was quite a heavy chest, and then another person, I would stroke his arm and say, now this stroking will cause you to lose all your strength. And when he goes to pick it up, he can't with all the tugging he wants, can't lift it. And then the first fellow tries and he lifts it easily, but the other fellow just can't, who's had the spell cast on him, can't lift it. That's one of my favorite. And I've always been intrigued by effects that involve electronics. And
tell me about that.
Well, I have a collection of over 100 effects that are electronic. One of my favorites is using a regular 60 watt or 100 watt light bulb and passing it out to spectators to examine, and then forming a chain of about 5 people holding hands in a room or on the platform, and making a chain. And I'm at one end holding a person's hand, and at the other end is a person holding the bulb, and I ask them to close their hand into a fist and screw the bulb into their fist, and then everybody rubs their feet on the floor to generate static electricity and look at the bulb, and it lights up.
Wow, that's a great trick.
Brilliant.
I've never seen that either.
See you do this one day.
Wow.
And then it goes out, and anybody can handle it, and at will by concentrating cause the bulb to relight.
What an amazing effect. What is it about these mechanical or electronic effects? And by the way, just to clarify, this isn't new electronic effects. These are older electronic effects, back when that was a challenging thing to build. You know?
Yeah, so I see
like
a Dutch magician who used the stage name of Anverdi, and he was a baker in a small city in Holland, and got interested in magic and then in electronics, and he invented and built, and I have a collection of everything that he ever made. And the 7 keys to ball pate, where you have a little nicely made chest and 7 keys, and only one of the keys will unlock the chest, and inside the chest is a $100 bill. And so you close it and then take the keys and put them all in a wine glass and shake them up so nobody knows which is the one that works. And everybody chooses a key in your small audience and tries the lock, and it won't open. And then I ask a person to become my representative with the last key, and they take it, put it in the lock, and I get my $100 back.
Wow.
And
that's great.
Yeah, this was, and then there's a chap in Spain who is a graduate electronics engineer, and he's just a genius. I truly, in my whole life, I've only met 2 people that I would put in the class of genius, and he's one of them. And
the
then,
other?
yeah, I will jump to the other. I was very interested in Mahatma Gandhi and his philosophy when I was in India, and I went to ashrams, little camps where he had followers of his, and they said, "Oh, you should talk. You're staying in New Delhi. You should talk to Madam Dr. Tayebji. She was one of his closest disciples, and she was not a Hindu as he was. She was a Muslim, but a scholar. She had degrees from both, a doctorate from Oxford, and I went to see her, and she said, what brings you to India? And I said, well, I'm a magician, and this is mystic India, and I'm trying to learn something about the mysticism. She said, how long are you staying? And I said, well, several months. She said, well, that wouldn't be a beginning. You have to stay much longer to learn what we mean by mystic India. And she said, for instance, if I tell you that I am a personal friend of your Jesus Christ, you'll think that that's some kind of a dream I'm in. But no, I've talked and argued with him, and I've seen, he's shown me the scars in his hands and from the nails that were driven through his palms, and I've talked to Moses and to all of the prophets, and she said, you'll think that this is in some kind of a dream, but it's not. I know them personally and argue with them. In fact, I said to Jesus, how could you have said on the cross, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? Because she said, my father is a devout Muslim, and there's no way he could believe that Allah would, under any circumstances, would forsake him. And she said, how do you explain that? And he said, well, you know, it's reporters and hearsay. I didn't ever say that. What I said was, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. But because her logic was that if Jesus thought that God had forsaken him, then he has forsaken God. And I guess logically.
And
is she one of this is the other genius that you
yes.
And
I'm an absolute genius, but such a mind that I can't begin to understand, and I don't believe her. But how,
right. Well, that was what I was going to say. I was going to say, like, it's interesting that you don't believe a word that she's saying, but she strikes you as a genius.
Yeah. Well, I could tell she was just a brilliant person, and no question. And Gandhi thought the same, because he was.
So how do you reconcile between her brilliance and her belief that she's able to speak to Christ and I mean, it's possible to be brilliant and be mistaken about things. I don't mean to suggest otherwise, but you know, how do you reconcile between those two? Obviously, she left you with such an impression that you consider one of these two people that you met in your life was a genius. So,
well, it was just somehow it exuded her brilliance and her education and her knowledge, but I think that she was like many believers. She's like, in my opinion, all religion is based on superstition and fantasy, and who can prove one way or the other?
Right.
But my conclusion after searching for 90 some odd years is that it's all imaginary and ancient writings and sayings that don't stand up to modern science.
We spoke about her as the second genius, but you were talking about the first genius.
Yes, his name is Cesarel, just a wonderful man in his 40s.
I just bought something from him.
Did you?
I did.
Oh, he is just the gentlest.
Is that what I think you did?
The light bulb.
Oh, okay. That's what I thought.
Oh, really?
I got his light bulb. That's why when you were talking about the light bulb, I got excited.
And it isn't his that I have.
Yeah, I have his though. I have
Yeah,
C's there.
I see.
We'll do a. I'll bring over mine. You bring over
I
yours.
see.
We'll do a little jam.
Yeah. I was flying home from France, and but I wanted to stop, either going over or coming back, just south of Madrid, where he lives and has his lab and workshop and his home. And another time, I don't know how to find it immediately, but I have some pictures of his new home that is just spectacular. It's super ultra modern with live trees growing inside the house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and garden all around, and he wants his family to live a great deal on the produce from their own little property, and the stuff that he invents is just genius.
Before we get to the wrap-up questions, I wanted to ask you about one more thing, which is a video which you recently showed us, which I guess I can't even explain what it is. So why don't you tell us what that video is, and I'm going to get a link so that people can go find it. But can you tell everyone what it was that you did about a month ago?
Well, I've been an ardent skier all my life. It's my favorite sport, and my grandson and I have skied in many, many unusual places, including Iran, and I go helicopter skiing every 5 years. I'd like to do it every year, but it's an expensive pastime. A young woman at the end of one of their promotional films said, anyone who says that the best things in life are free just hasn't tried heli skiing. But I go every 5 years, and this year was my quinquennial again. And I went to next month, I'll be 95. And so at age 94, they filmed me, this CMH helicopter ski company, and are sending it to the Guinness Book of World Records because in their records, the oldest helicopter skier is 91,
and
you beat him.
just for those again listening, when you say heli-skiing, if you don't know what heli-skiing is, Gordon straps himself to a helicopter, and then he skis down. You ride a helicopter to the top of a mountain, and then you jump out of this helicopter, and then you ski down fresh, unexplored mountainside that you can only get to via helicopter. So
that's correct. Yeah.
When you watch the video, when you click the link and watch the video, you'll see it looks like a 20-year-old skiing down a mountain. I didn't know that it would look like that. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
I love the part in the video where you ask the instructor, you say, hey, there's like a cliff. Can I go look over the cliff? He goes, yeah. You said, how far can I go? He goes, you go and then don't fall off. You go as close as you can without falling off the edge of a mountain. And I was like, oh my goodness.
Daring. It was an incredible video and an incredible thing to go to. I wouldn't even do that now.
I would be too. It's great. I know that did you have more follow-up? Because I have a question I want
Go ahead.
So I have one question for you, and that is, and it's a very open-ended question, but I look at you as someone who seems to have figured out life to some extent, whether you will admit it or not. And you exude joy, and every time I'm with you somewhere and people see you, they get excited. Like when we went to the Granite Club, which is a private club that you've been a member of for many years. When you walk in, people get up from their tables to come over to say hello. I remember once we were in the Granite Club, and a gentleman was serving another table, and he stopped in the middle of serving to come over to your table just to say hello to you. And everywhere you go, whether it's magic clubs or places, people seem happy to see you, and you seem happy to see them. And you go and you travel on adventures, and you go exploring, looking for magic, and you succeed in your dream of getting to travel and doing magic for money. And then partway through, you realize that that's not your dream anymore, that you don't want to lose the opportunity to meet people, and you give up on the magic. And everything you do, you seem to have figured out life, and you seem to succeed at what you're doing and bring joy into the world around you. And so my question I guess for you to answer to the listeners, but more so selfishly for myself, is what advice would you give someone who's in their early 20s, mid 30s? They love magic, but really they're just exploring life, trying to figure out what they want to do, and maybe magic is their way to travel, or magic is their way to ice break, or magic is their way to get work, or to socialize, or whatever it is. What advice would you give someone who's out there exploring life with magic?
Ben, you've given it all just in your question. You presented it perfectly. And I would add to that, it's so important, in my opinion, to love your fellow man and all mankind and womankind and nature. And so I think being happy is part of the passage. And so what I would highly recommend is when you get up in the morning, try to be happy to be alive and enjoy everything around you, and don't have any prejudices or dislikes for any other human being. It's kind of hard. Some of them give you a hard time, especially these terrorists today. But and I don't really have an answer for that, other than I think it's one of the downsides of religion. It's certainly religion that's driven them, and I think toward the end of my life, I think religion really has been far more a curse than a help to mankind, and I think it's all based on imagination and superstition. And so as to magic, it's a wonderful hobby, or can be a wonderful professional career. But the big thing is to stay happy and see as much of this world as you can.
I love it. I love it. We have a few wrap-up questions at the very end. So the first is the endless chain. So in order to get this podcast going on for eternity, each guest is asked to recommend another guest who absolutely must be on the podcast. So who is someone who you think we absolutely must have on? And you can give a few different people.
Cesaro.
Cesaro, fantastic. That's a great one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. If he's in a list of geniuses, then he's worth it for sure. That's very exciting. The next thing is the take-home point. So people have been listening to us talk about magic and religion and life for an hour plus now. And even though we get to sit here and enjoy, people are, who knows, they're washing their car or going for a run or whatever people do. So I want people to think back on this episode and hopefully remember one thing, one most important thing, which is most important for them. So for me, I think the most important thing is what it is that you just said, is, really enjoying yourself, respecting your fellow man. And, so much of the stories that you're sharing and so much of what you're talking about has to do with, how you're enjoying yourself, all the people that you met. You seem to remember all of these people that you met by name, and they had a big impact on you. And, we are our experiences and our stories, and we get out what we put into them. And that was something that I really took away from this. And, it excited me to travel, with magic. It excited me to meet other people and share what I know and learn and see other magic from around the world. That's something that I didn't really want to do, but now I kind of do want to do. So that was a big take-home point for me. Ben, what about for you? Is there something really important or memorable for you?
Well, there were a lot of things that we discussed that I think are very memorable and interesting. For me, I think the big takeaway was when we were discussing your experiences traveling, and how you initially, your goal was to travel and make money doing magic, and then partway through that journey, your focus shifted maybe a little bit, where you realized that you were really doing this thing so that you could experience the world and meet people and have these amazing experiences, and you didn't lose sight of the fact that magic was your goal or means rather to have that experience. And I know that I've been in situations where, I say to myself, like, I do magic because, it lets me travel somewhere in the world. And then I get to Scotland, let's say, and I'm doing a bunch of shows and events and I'm tired. And then I don't go out and I don't sightsee as much as I want to, or I don't want to hang out late the night after because I have an event the next day. And I'm using magic to see the world and to have these experiences, and trying to figure out what the best way to do that is. And it's what you said about keeping the focus, or keeping track of what my focus or what my goal is and where I'm moving and how to do that is very interesting to me, and something that I think you and I will talk about a lot more.
And then if I can just add,
yes,
you don't have
now
to
for
put
you.
it in.
So what is your take-home point?
No, but I wanted to tell you, we hear it said so often that this is a small world. And my most amazing example of it being a small world was going through Africa from Cairo to Cape Town. I wanted to see pygmies. They intrigued me, these little people, and they're nomadic. They live in the jungle in what was the Belgian Congo, right in the center of Africa. So if you could imagine in your mind a map of Africa in front of you, and then you put your finger where you believe is the center, that's where this event, Small World, takes place. My wife and I are traveling, and we stayed with a district commissioner and his family, and I told him that I was hoping I could find pygmies, and he said that it's very hard to find them because they're nomadic, and we can't say go there and they'll be there, because they'll have left there and moved on. And but he said right in the center of this jungle, was called the Ituri Forest, he said there's a mission hospital, and there are two white people, a doctor and his wife, and they may be able to get a native of theirs to take you into the jungle and find a pygmy tribe. And he said, but you'll have to leave early in the morning from our place, because you'll be going on a dirt path for about 200 miles. It's 400 miles through the whole jungle, but this hospital is in the middle. So you've got to do 200 miles on a farmer's lane. And it turned out we didn't see the sun all day because of the density of the growth above us. And we traveled as fast as we could, probably going an average of 40 miles an hour. And then about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we come to this clearing, and sure enough, up on stilts is a makeshift hospital with people lying on grass cots, and a little white house with a thatched roof, and out came this white woman. And all the patients in the hospital and all the staff were black, except the doctor, anyway, let me go back to my story. Out came this young white woman, said, "My goodness, where did you people?" She had never seen a tourist in all the couple of years she had lived there. And where are you from? And I said, well, I'm from Canada, and my wife is from France. And she said, from Canada? So am I. So here we are in the middle of Africa, and we're both from Canada. And she said, where in Canada? And I said, Hamilton, Ontario. And she said, so am I. And then she said, I know who you are. You're Gordon Fresh. I could have knocked me over with a feather. Wow. And her name was Ruth Petrie. She was a registered nurse and married to a doctor, and had these two little girls. And can you imagine somebody from your hometown in the middle of Africa? You've heard the story before, I'm afraid. And then do you know that is only half of the story? Years later, I'm in business, in the life insurance business in Hamilton, and I see a picture of a man in the paper who is being moved from Winnipeg to Hamilton as the manager of Manufacturers Life Insurance Company, Manulife. And I phoned this man said, I do quite a bit of business with your company, and I'd like to welcome you, have you for lunch at the Chamber of Commerce. Well, anyway, at the Chamber, they had a dining room in Hamilton. So we're sitting there and having lunch, and a very fine fellow, Roy Henderson, and he mentions that he has a son working as an accountant, chartered accountant in Johannesburg, South Africa. And I said, oh, I've been to Johannesburg, was there on a motorcycle. And then that led to my telling this incredible story of Mitty. And it was the first time I could see on his face this strange expression. I thought, he doesn't know me, and he doesn't believe that that's possible. And so I reached in my pocket and took out, I only had 4 or 5 pictures, like one of the Taj Mahal and another one of the Great Pyramid of Cheops, and one of this lady and her 2 little girls sitting on her knees. And he said, and I'm thinking he doesn't believe me, and I'm showing him proof, and he says, you see that little girl there? I said, yeah, that's my daughter-in-law.
Whoa.
Can you imagine?
Wow.
She grew up, and his son was a doctor, and they married.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So it is a small world.
Yeah.
It is a small world. Do you have any wrap-up advice or anything from this whole episode? Is there anything that, if people remember one thing, what's the one thing they should take home from today's
Please
talk?
love your fellow man.
Love your fellow man. I absolutely love it. There's 2 more questions to ask you. The first is about modern magic. So is there something in the world of magic right now that you enjoy, and something in the world of magic right now that you don't enjoy?
I enjoy good magic, whether it's modern or old. Magic is magic. And so if it's clever and well
constructed
and well presented, then it's great. I enjoy it. I love going to the Magic Castle and being fooled. And I think that's what many magicians, we love to be fooled. I like nothing better than to wonder how on earth that was done. And so modern or old, it doesn't matter. It's if it's good magic, it's great.
I love it. And with that, the final thing is, you have the ears of thousands of magicians listening. Is there anything that you want to tell them? Any final words of wisdom, advice about the world of magic that they should know, or love your fellow man?
No, I don't think I'm in a position to.
Such a humble man.
Oh, yes. But practice hard, and you can never practice too much. But you've got to get out there and perform as well.
Fabulous,
I love what you
fabulous
said earlier. I want to
advice.
get it as a tattoo. There's nothing more pitiful than
Then
magic
bad
that hasn't been
magic. Yeah,
practiced.
magic has been
Nothing
practiced.
more pitiful. Don't
I love
be
that.
pitiful.
And Gordon, with that, thank you so much for this incredible interview and sitting down and
thank
welcoming
you.
us into your home. This was such a pleasure. And of course, a big thank you to everybody who listened to this and joined us for this episode. We will see you all next Thursday. Well, there you go. I hope that you liked the episode, and I hope that you learned something. Maybe something about yourself, maybe something about magic, maybe you were inspired to go on a trip yourself. If you liked this episode, and if you liked the kind of things we were talking about, do me a favor, share it with the world, tell somebody about it, go check out that YouTube video and share it with the world. And the more people that know about this podcast, the more people that know about these incredible and important conversations, the better. So thank you so much for being here, and I will see you next Thursday. Peace.